The Boss at Six Flags St. Louis is one of the most polarizing wooden roller coasters out there. Some call this ride underrated, others call it one of the most unpleasant rides in the world. For me, I fall somewhere in the middle, so in this video, I will review the Boss, the hulking wooden roller coaster at Six Flags St. Louis. First off, this coaster is a statistical monster. Boss is the 8th fastest wooden roller coaster in the world at 66 miles per hour, and it's even more impressive when you realize that 6 of the 7 coasters ahead of it are either Intamin prefabs or RMC topper track wood coasters. This means that Boss is the 2nd fastest traditional wood coaster in the world, just 1 mile per hour behind Holiday World's Voyage. Boss also is the 9th tallest drop of any wood coaster at 150 feet or 46 meters. And like the speed record, all but one of the rides ahead of it are all prefabs or topper track wood coasters. As Boss is yet again only behind Voyage for traditional wood coasters. Boss is also among the longest wood coasters in the world at 4,631 feet or 1,412 meters in length. The ride just barely misses the top 10 as the ride's double helix finale was removed in 2018, which reduced the ride's track length by roughly 420 feet or 128 meters. At its original length, Boss would still be the 7th longest wood coaster in the world. With stats like this, Boss is well deserving of its name. However, it is an extremely difficult ride to maintain. Built by Custom Coasters International, Boss opened in 2000. And as awesome as CCI's layouts were, their coasters were not known for their durability. CCI kept their prices down by using the cheapest materials possible. This is why many of their rides became rough over time without proper maintenance. Boss was especially susceptible to this considering the sheer size of this coaster. And many riders have found this coaster unbearably rough. It is clear that Six Flags St. Louis is aware of this. For one, the ride now brings you a near stop on the mid-course brake run. This causes you to crawl through the start of the second half. But the reduced speed does help reduce wear and tear on the structure. Originally, the ride ran through this section uninhibited, and the second half was even wilder by all accounts. I've heard of a few lucky riders getting untrimmed Boss rides in recent years, but they're few and far between. 2. The Helix was arguably the most intense part of the ride. While I unfortunately never experienced Boss with this element, my first time riding this coaster was in 2018, shortly after it reopened. Those who did experience the double helix said it's some of the best laterals of any coaster. But it also became uncomfortable, combined with the jackhammering you experienced during this element. That is why it was replaced with a basic 180-degree turn to make the ride more tolerable for a majority of guests. And I know Six Flags St. Louis knows how to maintain a wood coaster. Screamin' Eagle and American Thunder both run quite smoothly, but the Boss has a far more ambitious layout than either of those two rides. So the fact it's in a rideable state is an accomplishment in itself. One of the other issues with Boss, for most people, are the Gerstlauer trains. While enthusiasts do praise the Gerstlauer trains and RMCs like Iron Rattler and New Texas Giant, most enthusiasts despise their wood coaster trains. But these trains have pros and cons. The biggest pro is that they have more legroom than the more common PTC trains. And the lack of a seatbelt makes it possible to get more airtime depending how far the lap bar comes down. But there are 2 negatives in the rider comfort department. First, the lap bars have very little padding, so if you get stapled, the lap bar is absolutely unforgiving. 2, the trains have harder padding than most wood coaster trains out there, so you don't get to absorb the shock very well. I admittedly have a high tolerance for rough rides, so I can handle the Boss. But I think the poor padding on the trains is one of the biggest reasons why people dislike the Gerstlauer trains, and the Boss specifically. I mentioned Six Flags severely trims the Boss's second half, but this can make it a bit problematic to ride this coaster. The speed loss makes the Boss extremely prone to valleying. This is why the coaster doesn't run at the start or end of the Six Flags St. Louis season. I believe the temperature needs to be in the 60s for this coaster to operate. The coaster also has a minimum rider requirement. Even when the coaster is fully warmed up, the park cannot risk sending out a train unless it's halfway filled. This was most evident in 2018. Boss was running with 2 trains, but when the ride became a walk-on later in the day, they only were loading 1 train with guests. The second train was loaded with sandbags to weigh it down. I found this sort of strange that they wouldn't just transfer the train off, but it did eliminate the need for maintenance to come by, so maybe it was just faster. And because of where the boss is, it's in the back corner of the park in the woods. I don't recommend going to this ride first unless you have a large party. It takes a while for others to make it back to the boss, and that queue line is ridiculously long, so it stinks hiking all the way to the station, only to be turned around due to there not being enough riders yet. In terms of seat selection, I prefer the back row in the boss. Because of how many sizable drops there are in this coaster, you get more airtime back there. However, it is rougher back there, so if you don't have a tolerance for rough rides like me, you'll probably want to ride as close to the front as possible. Addressing the roughness, Boss definitely jackhammers a bit in the valleys, but I was able to ride the coaster a few times in a row without too much trouble. For me, I'd classify the coaster more as aggressive than rough. I only started to get a minor headache after my 4th or 5th consecutive ride. One of the biggest strengths of Boss that I haven't talked about yet is the ride's location. It is tucked back in the woods. For this reason, it is near impossible to see any of this coaster from the off-ride. It gives the coaster a mysterious feel. And it's one of the reasons I'd love to try this ride at night someday. I imagine it's pitch black back there. Boss begins with a 122-foot or 37-meter tall lift. At the top, you round a corner and plunge down the big drop. But this is no ordinary drop. It's actually a double down that uses the terrain to its advantage. The first part of this drop is large and fairly steep. It's probably close to 120 or 125 feet in size. And this drop gives a good pop of airtime in the back row. The second part of the drop doesn't occur immediately as you rip through a section of straight track where you really feel the coaster's speed, especially since you pierce through the ride's structure. But then you fly down this little dip that you can't see coming. And when you go down a small dip at speeds of 55 to 60 miles per hour, you get great airtime. The dip is stretched out, so the airtime is more of the floater variety, but it's the most sustained spot of airtime on the entire ride. And the suddenness of the drop and how the track literally drops out beneath you gives you a tummy tickling sensation similar to a drop tower. You then whip around this speed hill that's banked to the right. This gives some mild floater airtime, but more notably, crushing laterals considering how fast you traverse this element. You then rise up into a giant turnaround. I don't recall getting any airtime up front, but the drop off this turnaround gives some okay floater airtime in the back row. That's followed by another low to the ground banked speed hill. This one is bumpier than the first one. It's definitely the bumpiest spot in the ride if you ask me, but the laterals are just as strong as the initial speed hill. And it also delivers some floater airtime despite how drawn out it is. You then rise up into the second turnaround. The apex of this hill is quite sharp, so you get a quick pop of airtime up front and a small dose of laterals rounding the corner. The first half of Boss has amazing pacing. It feels fast, and the ride is constantly keeping you on your toes with giant drops and banked speed hills. But then you hit the mid-course brake run, and the pacing dies. You come to a near full stop. This causes the drop to sort of feel like a dive coaster up front, since you're held over the drop off the turnaround for a few seconds. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a good thing, but it's just something of note. In the back, you get some mild floater airtime, and I can only dream what that airtime moment would have been like without the trim brake. You then rise up into the third turnaround, and it's a borderline miracle the train makes it through this element. You crawl through this turnaround. I'm honestly shocked Six Flags hasn't lowered this section or added an anti-rollback device. If Boss valleys, I have to think it happens right here. But the drop off this turnaround does give some good floater airtime, and this again is a major what if for me if the ride was running at its original speed. You then rip over another banked speed hill. This one has weaker laterals than the first two, but the laterals are still quite good, but the floater airtime is just as good as the initial speed hills. You then re-emerge from the woods and travel over these two drawn-out bunny hills next to the station. And unfortunately, these hills offer no airtime or laterals. Again, if the ride wasn't trimmed, I imagine these hills would have offered something in that department. You then fly around the low turn that replaced the original double helix, and then you haul over a small bunny hill. Since the helix was removed, you take this bunny hill with more speed than ever, so it delivers a violent pop of ejector airtime throughout the whole train. And then you hop up into the brake run. If you're up front, you get another abrupt pop of ejector airtime, and it occurs so fast you barely have returned to your seat from the prior airtime moment. It's great getting the strongest airtime moment of the ride right before you hit the brake run. It leaves you breathless. So what would I rate the Boss? I would give this coaster a 7 out of 10. The first half is great. It feels completely out of control with the large drops and banked speed hills. The combination of laterals, airtime, and speed is downright crazy. But the ride's pacing is demolished in the second half by the mid-course. The second half does have some good moments, like the drop off the turnaround, the banked speed hill, and the final bunny hill, but you have a lot of dead space in between. Honestly, the poor pacing is my biggest issue with this ride, not the roughness. The ride is shaky in the valleys, but again, I find it rideable since I grew up riding coasters like Cyclone at Six Flags New England and Boulder Dash at Lake Compounce. In 2020, I thought the Boss was actually running the best of all the wood coasters at Six Flags St. Louis. I thought it ran similarly to my 2018 rides, but it vaulted ahead of American Thunder and Screamin' Eagle since those two coasters weren't running as fast for me in 2020. But the big question going forward is, what will Six Flags do with the Boss? It is clear they're putting band-aids on this coaster with the mid-course trim and the removal of the final helix. But people still find the coaster rough, and I think there are three options. I think any of the three would improve the ride experience. 1. The ride could be RMC'd. Boss would have a ton of potential as an RMC, considering that massive structure, and it would also become one of the best coasters in the world. It would be immaculately smooth, have some wild airtime, probably mix in an inversion or two, and maintain that same great wood setting. But RMCing the full length of Boss's layout would be quite costly. 2. The ride could continue to be retracked with wood. I doubt Six Flags would invest in a full retracking like Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm, so they'd probably continue fixing the ride in small sections. This is the cheapest approach each year, but the park will keep having to invest in the ride continuously, and the ride experience will remain similar to what it is today. 3. The ride could get GCI Titan Track. If this treatment works well on Predator at Six Flags Darien Lake, I could see Six Flags going down this route. It would be more affordable than getting an all-new layout from RMC, and it would probably provide a more robust, long-term solution to address the rough spots in the ride. And I'd honestly be on board with this, because I think Boss's layout is good. They can one day turn off the trim. So those are my thoughts on Boss at Six Flags St. Louis. What are your thoughts on this coaster? Do you find it rough, or do you enjoy it like me? Also, what do you think the park should do with the Boss long term? I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate if you gave this video a like, and you considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.